Okay. Well, hello, everyone. This is Jeanne-Marie Pinel speaking to you from San Diego for the Montessori show. It is May,
Hi.
May 2018, and I have Simone here with me, who is not speaking to us from Amsterdam, but from another undisclosed location. Where are you, Simone?
I know I'm calling in from Switzerland today. We're at a Montessori retreat in the mountains. It is gorgeous. We arrived last night and it was raining and it was all cloudy and you could see a few mountains, but not really much. We woke up to sunshine and this valley. It's like looks like something out of Heidi, the film, with the little wooden chalets and the sound of bells, and it's the sound of cowbells literally being seen.
Wonderful. Oh, beautiful. And so just before we get started, I'd love to know, what does this Montessori retreat entail? Like, who organized it and what are you hoping to get out of it?
So it's been organized by the Swiss Association, Montessori Association. And Jessica, who I did my training with in Australia, has been trying to get, she lives here in Switzerland, has been trying to get Judy O'Ryan to come and run some Swiss training or refresher, this kind of thing. And she had this idea to do a retreat, which isn't another conference. It's actually some time in nature to relax, have more conversations, and it's a small group of 40 of us.
Oh,
and there's parents, there's people from 0 to 3 age group, 3 to 6 and 6 to 12 trainers. But there's also just parents as well, not just parents, but there's also parents and people interested in, learning more about the Montessori approach. So it's been very beautiful to connect with these people in a very intimate way, very small.
Yeah, no, it sounds delightful. That sounds delightful. And so Judy made it. Are there other trainers there as well?
Heidi will be arriving tonight. Heidi Philippat Olcock.
Okay.
And then the rest, I did a presentation today on some parent information sessions, and Anna from Elton for Mars gave some information to the parents. If anyone follows that blog, it was really beautiful to hear her share how she set up her home, why she sets up her home like that. And for new parents, it's super inspiring because she has gorgeous illustrated pictures taken from this perspective, often from her children and things like that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, perfect. Well, welcome everybody. Good to see those of you that I can actually see. I like this new format where I can see your faces. I have muted everybody so that if you do want to speak at some point, make sure to unmute yourself. And we are going to get started with this month's topic, which is all about language. And so I just wanted to, first of all, maybe just read a quote from The Absorbent Mind that talks about language that I find just delightful. And she says, language is something done at an unconscious level in the mind. It begins and unfolds in the darkest depth of the unconscious. And when it emerges, it is as a fixed acquisition. And so to me, this is really this notion that, the child through this stage of the absorbent mind, and this starts in prenatal life, that they are starting to hear the sound of the language and be interested in it. And then, the sensitive period of language and such, where they're just this amazing acquisition, those first 3 years of life, to think that this, child that comes to us, this little, tiny little human being, within maybe 2.5 years, 3 years, they are able to speak a totally foreign language in perfect syntax, in sentences and everything. So it is, to me, just miraculous as to what happens. But what's important to know is as parents, as guides, is how can we support that? How can we really encourage language development? Because it is dependent on us, that language, if the child is not exposed to language, then language doesn't really occur, doesn't develop. So it really needs the constant feeding to it. So that's
to add to that is that feeding of it works best when it's done in personal relationships and not from a screen, that kind of thing.
Totally. Yes, the notion that it's about human interaction not just, screens and stuff. So yes, very, very true. Okay, perfect. So Simone, I know we had a lot of questions come in because this is a topic that people are very interested in. And so maybe we'll just start on answering those questions. And then those of you who are here with us live, if you have a question, please let me know maybe in the chat so I can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself and we can take your questions as well. All righty.
Great. All right, well, we'll start with a question from Jana. She says, my baby Olivia was born on the 16th of December, so she's approaching 5 months soon. How that time flies. She's from Slovakia and her husband's English and they live in the UK. She's the only person with whom Olivia can speak Slovak, and therefore I'd like to ask how to approach teaching her this language alongside my English family. I do speak to her in Slovak when at home, but I'm worried she's going to get confused, as when I'm outside of the house, out and about, I have to switch to English so that other people can take part in our conversations. My other questions are, what are the activities I could be doing to encourage talking in both languages? When should I be expecting her first words in whatever language these might be? I also would be interested to hear more about language acquisition, about how the brain develops when learning foreign languages so young. So should we start first with then how the child won't get confused when she speaks Slovak in the home and English out of the house?
Yes, I mean, to me, the child's mind is pretty amazing. That this is so. Just one request of everybody that is on live with us: if you could just make sure you mute yourself, because I'm hearing some people, and I don't know how to mute everybody. So that would be just wonderful. Oh, I see. I'm new to this platform. So okay. So for me, the fact that you are speaking your mother tongue, your natural language to your child when you are just one-on-one with her, and then when you're out and about, there is another language. That is not confusing to the child. That is their reality. And this is actually, helping the child make even more of these connections in the brain. So for me, I just, there really isn't any confusion. It's really, mommy speaks this language, and I have a special language with mommy that she understands. And when I'm out in the world, we speak a different language, and probably with daddy, we speak a different language, and that's fine. I mean, I know of children that have multiple languages. I was actually just talking to a family yesterday, a Russian family. They speak Russian at home. The child is in a Spanish immersion class, and we live in the United States, so he hears English, on the playground. He's trilingual, and he's 5 years old, and perfectly well, can go back and forth. They figure out who speaks what, and they have their way of communicating. So first of all, it will not confuse your child. Just keep on giving her the gift of your native tongue. And speak the other language that is the common language in your environment, and your child will figure it all out.
The other thing you can add is they call that domains of use. So if you're using English maybe outside of the house and you're being consistent with that, then they'll also, as long as you're consistent with where you mostly are, then it will be kind of clear. If you're going to an English-speaking play group and you use to speak English, then they'll learn this is where we speak English. If you're in a cafe, they'll also learn that as well.
Right. No, they're very smart. Very smart.
Okay, so the second question then was, what are the activities I could be doing to encourage talk in both languages? And when should I be expecting her first words in whatever language these might be?
So hold on. As I answer this, I'm just going to share my screen if I can. Give me just a second. So the activities really is just to really continue for one, being very vigilant as to being consistent, that when you are alone, when you are one-on-one, you speak your native tongue. And this is hard because I know it from experience. My native tongues, I'm actually raised as bilingual, so I speak English and French fluently both. Nobody can detect my accent in either languages. But that I try to do for my own children. And it's hard because you have to remind
Oh,
yourself
out of there, Jake.
of what language to speak. Hold on here, I'm going to mute everybody. Unless you can, Simone, can you mute
Jake,
people?
don't touch, please.
Hold on. We hear
Sorry,
people.
Jean-Marie, I was muted myself. I cannot mute from this end.
Okay. I thought I saw somewhere, but maybe because I'm sharing the screen. So if everybody can see the screen, this is actually a chart that I just redrew that is from the Absorbent Mind. This is Dr. Maria Montessori's sequence of
We're going to go downstairs. Come on.
what is language
Jake,
development.
let's go. We'll have snack.
Hold on just one second. I'm going to try to figure this one out because.
No, downstairs, Zoe.
Okay.
This is real life Montessori in practice. How we can manage that language without too much. So if you're not muted, then you might
if you could make sure to mute yourself when you come on, because I'm not quite sure. So anyway, I was just describing this chart, and basically this chart really takes us. This is really the 2.5 first years of life. So it really talks about the different progression of what is going on for the child. And so when when can you expect words? It's really not until about 12 months or so, but you can start hearing the child practicing their vocal cords and making those first syllable sounds pretty much around 6 months. But before that, they are also looking at your mouth very intensely, because they can see that there's language coming from it, and they're just very interested. So and Simone will send this. I'll include this PDF for everybody, but it can be found in The Absorbent Mind by Dr. Maria Montessori, where she talks a lot about language there. Okay. So Simone, did that answer the question? Because I got kind of distracted with...
Yeah, with the noise in the background. She wanted to know which activities she could also do to encourage language in both languages. So when they're young babies, we start with, our conversation and our rich language in all the daily life. Like, I'm changing your nappy now, and giving them time to maybe respond with lifting their heads up, allowing those pauses. So you're already learning a conversation even pre-verbally. A conversation can also be me poking my tongue out and the baby copies. So these are already building skills for language. They learn turn, take, talk around them, and then they'll get onto stories, very simple sentences on each page, maybe with board books, and then you move on to paper, and so that moves on. Then I'm always naming things in all my daily life. Behind me there's a tree branch, there's a leaf, and I can tell them what I see around me, and this then gets more complicated. You can have vocabulary baskets for them to explore, and you can be naming as they put a brush into their mouth. Oh, you've got a brush, so you're naming. At 5 months, you're doing a lot of just rich language in your daily life, and then moving on, once they're more like toddlers, to having maybe language baskets around classified objects and things like this. Is there too much background noise for you? We've got a whole group just arrived.
No, you're fine. I was just trying to figure out how to mute people as they come on.
Okay, perfect.
And it'd be good for you to maybe explain a little bit more about, because I don't know if everybody knows the whole kind of the language cards that we can create, and the with the objects, because I think that is a beautiful activity for children.
Oh, so me, yeah? Definitely. So if you have language objects, we usually classify them by a theme. So for example, all of the sea animals. Yeah. And then you can, when it's firstly just objects, so they're touching and feeling, and I could name, oh, this is the humpback whale, octopus. And I'm just naming them as we play. And then I can also start to introduce cards. And usually it's a photo of the card, so it's exactly the same. It's like, oh, look, it's exactly the same. And I play different games with them. Or I could pick a card. Which one do we get? We got the humpback whale. Let's see if we can find it. And then we can go, is this the humpback whale? No. Is this the humpback whale? No. So as they go, you can keep adding A's. There's one that I really like now where we have them all face down. And then we turn them over to see if we can find them. And that kind of keeps interest as well. And practicing, you're basically playing games to see which ones they're starting to know in a playful way, not in a testing way. And that's how we mostly do those. And then you can move on to finding pictures of the sea animals, maybe in a book, or you can print off other pictures of sea animals so that then they're seeing not exactly the same octopus as the one that's in front of them, but they see tentacles and they realize, this is the octopus. They have to really understand the essence of it. So that's how it moves along. Just objects with matching cards, objects with similar cards, and then we move on to just cards because we can't have everything in a little model form in our classrooms or in our homes, so we can use cards and books.
Yes, and to me it's an important point too, is that oftentimes I feel families go straight to the cards, and what I love about the sequence of the Montessori with the actual objects that match up to the cards is that the child is able to really understand this concept that things can be represented in
I'm not
a
sure.
dimensional image. And that's really, really important for them to be able to kind of go through that. So start with real objects, the real sensorial objects of everything. And then you can do pretend objects because, we can't bring an elephant into our homes or into our classrooms or a fire truck or things like that. But we've already seen them out and about is very important. So yes, wonderful. Okay. Simone, do you have another question? Have I lost Simone? Maybe I've lost Simone. No, she's there, but I don't see her anymore. She did say that her internet would be a little slow. So I'm going to... Oh, you're back.
I fell off.
I'll
keep trying.
Okay.
So I think there was one more part of that question. I'm just going to see if I can open up that window.
And I've got some questions in the chat as well. So.
Oh, perfect. So it says here, when should I be expecting her first words in whatever language these might be? And we've now talked about language acquisition and how about the brain develops when learning foreign languages. Oh, we can get maybe into that a little bit.
Yeah, and that was why I showed the chart. It's, I would expect really word, like a meaningful word, probably not until 9-12 months, but you are now in the stage where she's really going to practice making those sounds and practice the use of the vocal cords, because we must remember that for language to occur, there are several things that need to be functioning. First, it's the auditory organs. So, those start actually developing in prenatal life. They're still quite immature at the birth and are continuing to develop. So, and that's why we're careful with not, too loud of noises and such, because it's still very delicate. And why we also do the testing very, very early on when the child is born to detect any abnormalities right away. So we have the auditory organs. Then we have also the vocal organs, that those are going to start developing a little later as what we call the myelinization happens, which is what this whole process of fatty tissues around the nerve endings so that we can start using things. And children are born with only the mouth for sucking and swallowing really is myelinized, and that's why their neck is hard to hold up, because the whole process hasn't completed yet. And so those are the two things that unfortunately, we don't have much control over. This is nature, whether, everything is functioning. And then the other thing that needs to function is all of the language processing, areas of the brain. So there, again, it's nature. What we do have control over is the richness of the language environment that we give to the children. And so this is really where our role as parents, as guides, as anyone interacting with children is to give them the richness of our language, the beauty of our language. And that's why I always encourage, if you have a mother tongue that you speak well, share that, because this is all very important for the child to absorb. And then the last thing is we need the child to have the desire to communicate. And this, again, I feel that we are responsible in the way that we interact, in the way of letting them know that what they have to say is so important, and I'm here and I'm listening to you. And even sometimes you don't really understand what they're saying, you're still bewildered by all this information that they want to tell you, even when they're, little babies that are just cooing and all of this, because they are wanting to communicate. And it's so important for us to respond back and really give that human interaction to them.
Great. And I think, Jen, I must admit, I don't know if there's a different part of the brain that's involved with a foreign language. I don't think so. I think it's the same language area that develops. Is that true?
I don't know for sure. And I was asking some of our mentors, and I did not get any response. I'm assuming that yes, that it is the same, because I know for myself, being, a dual language, it's all, I feel like it's all in the same place, and sometimes I tell people, like, my real language, my true mother tongue is really a mixture of both languages, because all of the members of my family speak both French and English. And when I'm with them and I know that they understand both, we go back and forth and we intertwine, the different languages, which I'm sure you do, Simone, with people who speak Dutch and English, for example, right? When you're in a conversation with people that understand both, we tend to intertwine, and that's our true language.
Sometimes there's some nice Dutch words. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So yeah.
Sometimes there's a nice word that's very nice in Dutch, and so you just use that.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to Katka's question. She says how to teach the sounds of letters when I have a bilingual child. I know that I'm supposed to teach the phonetic sound, letter sounds, for example. The word cat is K in the phoneme in English, but in the Slovak word, for citron, it's actually pronounced and not cat. So I hope that it's not too confusing. So she's kind of, it's a sound in Slovak and a K sound in English, the C.
So for me, this is just from experience of being in a bilingual classroom. Is that we want to focus on one language first for kind of the acquisition of the sounds of the alphabet and to start reading and everything. So we focus on just one, and when we feel that there is a real understanding and that they've acquired all of the basic sounds in that one language, then we start introducing another one. Because and this is not based on research, this is just really my personal reasoning to it, is that would be confusing, that the same shape of a letter has different sounds depending on where you are. So I would focus first on what is the main language that you want your child to start reading to be able to introduce all those sounds. And once that process has started, then we can go back and introduce the other language, the second or the third and such. but there's a real base that needs to be the foundation of that first language that needs to be established. Does that make sense, Simone? You're muted. You're muted. You're muted.
Click. Okay,
Yeah.
now I found my mute button. Okay, it's getting very wobbly around here, so I might fall off again.
Okay.
It was very clear, and I have seen it done differently, where there was, say, a Dutch-speaking teacher doing the sounds in the Dutch language and an English-speaking teacher doing the English language. So if she's homeschooling, it may be that whoever is the native English speaker could do it in that language, and the Slovak speaker could do it in theirs. So that might be another way. I think it's very much keep it consistent, whatever you choose to do. So you either I know in the Dutch schooling system, they really want them to have Dutch kids, and then they're allowed to add a second language. So they do that first. But I have seen it done both ways. So then I think it falls into that, again, kind of domains of use is like, just be consistent with what you're going to do so that it's.
Okay.
Those
if it's okay with you, I'd like to answer some of the questions that came into the chat.
Sure.
So Kinja, who is actually with us, has a 19-month-old girl who speaks 3 languages at home and has a 4th language at her daycare. So kudos to you, because that's pretty amazing that this little 19-month-old is able to have all of these language. But she's interested in adapting language activities in all 4 languages. And what are your best tips on cultivating so many languages at once? So here again, I would really focus on the language activities within that language be done with that one person that it is their native tongue, so that she can, maybe if mom speaks a certain language, then we do the language activities in that language. If dad speaks another language, we can do the activities in that language. And at school, she's going to have other language activities. Would be the way that I would approach it. Unless you have, the same activity and you've just created it 4 different times with, and depending on her mood, you can do, whatever language. But I would definitely, because I'm assuming, and this is an assumption that the mother or the father don't necessarily speak all 3 or all 4. So I would, want them to only give what is the quality language that they speak, if that makes sense.
Yeah, their mother tongue. Yeah, that makes sense. There was a girl who I was working in a bilingual school, and she spoke Dutch and English in the school and had a German and Italian mother. And because we kept them all separate, so I was one of the English speaking teachers, the Dutch teachers, when she saw me in the street, she'd speak English. When she asked her papa for an apple, asked in German, and the mother in Italian. So as long as you keep it clear, I don't think I would go home and start trying to set them up in the 4 languages, keep the extra languages, out of that home environment. And the 3rd language, maybe use it as a family language and more play the activities in one language, I think would maybe be most clear. So like
yes.
Marie was saying.
Yeah.
Cool. Are there any others in the chat?
There are some, but do you want to read off maybe some of the ones that came in earlier?
Yeah. Okay, so Duba asked, I'd be keen to know whether it's okay to switch languages in a bilingual home. Both my partner and I are native German and speakers and speak in German to each other. However, I've been speaking in German and my partner in English to our now 21-month-old from birth, as we're in an English-speaking country. And I wanted him to grow up properly bilingual and understand what's happening around him, particularly when he was little and with me all the time. He's been in an English-speaking daycare 3 days a week now, and I also go with him to a Montessori playgroup and to other things where I speak English. So my partner and I have been wondering whether we should start both speaking in German with him, as he now hears a lot more English than German. Would that be okay or utterly confusing? No. Also, I often switch to English when we're at playgroup, as I find it impolite to speak in another language in front of other people. But again, could that be confusing? So we're getting similar questions, but...
So not confusing at all. Just not confusing at all. The German is the language that we speak at home. And German is the language that mom and dad speak with me. And I have a special language with mom and dad. So it's not at all confusing. And, they're hearing the English in the daycare outside, and you are modeling, proper communication and being, polite, as you say, because it's true that it's, somewhat impolite to have conversations in front of other people that don't understand you. Sometimes it's advantageous, but but it's true that it's not extremely respectful. So not at all confusing, and I would actually encourage that you speak only German at home, because it is both your native language, and that is, you're going to give the richness and the proper language to your child, as opposed to trying to speak another language that is not yours. They will pick up on the subtleties of your accent and everything. So definitely not at all confusing, and keep up, introducing both languages. You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, everyone was laughing in the background. I forgot to turn myself back on. Okay. We are, for those of you who joined late, I'm actually in a conference in Switzerland at the moment, and I'm sitting in the foyer of our accommodation, which is why I might fall off the Wi-Fi connection, or I mute myself and forget to turn myself back on. Apologies. Okay, we're running with it. Real life. We are in an English-speaking home in the US. I fumbled through both Swedish and Spanish. My husband is US raised, but a native Spanish speaker. He had what I understand to be trauma from learning English in school and being embarrassed about forgetting some Spanish while in school. I share that because he believes immersion is the only way to learn Spanish, which we can't really provide at home. I agree immersion is best, but that's not our reality at this time. My children are 4 months, 2, 4, and 6 years old. Our 6-year-old is very resistant to learning Spanish, but I would love for my children not to struggle as hard as I did learning foreign language. We're on a waiting list for our local public Spanish and English Montessori school, I think. But if that does not work out, we will continue to homeschool.
So I would be okay with your child being resistant to learning another language. Like, just continue. Your husband, being a native Spanish speaker, can definitely continue sharing that language. So through storytelling, through reading books, through listening to music and such in that language, and just giving it to your child. Whether your child answers back in that language or not doesn't matter. As long as you are giving that language, they are absorbing it. They are making sense of it. And one day there's going to be a click where they're going to understand how amazing it is to speak a different language, and how amazing it is to be able to communicate with people in a different community and such. And I say this out of experience, because we moved here when my daughter was 2. So I was living in France, and we moved to the US when my daughter was 2. And then I had a son here. And even though my daughter was in that sensitive period of learning when we moved here, she picked up English very, very quickly, much quicker than my husband at the time, who was struggling to learn a foreign language. But I remember very distinctively a time when both of them would tell me, "Oh, Mom, stop talking to us that way," or "Why are you talking in French?" or all of this. And because they were resisting me, but I kept at it. And suddenly they realized, on their own, that, oh my gosh, they had something that other people didn't have, that they could communicate with me, in private, nobody would understand. Or when we traveled, and I think this was the important part, is when we traveled back to France, they were able to communicate. And that was really important. So I would just say, just persist. It's not about teaching. It's just about sharing, and try to have as many, different cultural experiences. If you can, travel to the country, where that language is spoken. But definitely keep at it.
And it doesn't specifically say, but the father could speak Spanish with the children in
Right.
all the other parts of their life. So they're going to have those two languages coming in.
Exactly.
So she could be doing the homeschooling if it's her that's mostly homeschooling in English, and then you're getting a lot of input from the father in the Spanish. So I would continue to do that. Hope that helps.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Valentina has a good question. We are Italian living in the US, but moving back to Italy in a few months. My kids, 2 and 4 years old, are bilingual, Italian at home and English at school. And I'm really thankful to the Montessori teachers who worked amazingly when they arrived in the country without knowing a word of English. I'm wondering if it's possible to keep their bilingualism when we move back to Italy. We're thinking about a bilingual school, reading books and watching movies in English, but will that be enough? Any suggestions?
It will be enough, definitely. And then as much as possible, if you can travel to countries that speak, or try to be part of a, play group where there's other English speakers and things like that, is very helpful. Even though I will say that children tend to have their own language too, because again, when we moved here, there's quite a big, French community. And for me, I wanted my children to continue speaking French. Well, when all the French kids get together here, they speak English because that's, and it's not until it's later, until they're older, where they, have something special that they're going to show off. But for the most part, they like to just fit in and speak that language. So when you move back to Italy, definitely continue listening to, English speaking music. If you can speak at home, fine. Or maybe, have some English kind of speaking activities that can be done outside the home and things like that. But know that what they've acquired so far in a total immersion from being in the States has already done a lot. So to keep it up is important, but the foundation is already there.
Great. Do you have any questions you'd like to skip to now, maybe in the chat?
Sure. So Katerina says, native language is Czech. She's living in Sweden, so speaking Swedish and talking in English with her husband, who's from Nigeria. My concern is that I myself don't stick to one language during the day. Sometimes I could mix two or all in one sentence, so I totally relate to that. And for me, it seems like all the languages that I speak are getting to the same level, meaning even my native language is getting limited vocabulary. Okay. I'm not sure what my son will get from my language chaos. So, Katarina, if for me, again, this is, I think the gift that you have to offer your child is your native language. It is Czech. So if you want your child to speak Czech, I would try as much as possible to make a concerted effort that when you are one-on-one, so this is not throughout the day with other people and everything, because it's not possible with your husband or being outside and such, but when you are one-on-one with your son, if you could try to be vigilant to really speak Czech and read and check for yourself so that you don't lose it and such. But I mean, it sounds like you have multiple languages, learning, Swedish and English and all of that. So it's just, again, it's that consistency. But to me, I guess I just want to have a word of, all of you parents, because I'm just amazed by how many parents have these multilingual homes, which is just wonderful. Don't beat yourself up. Like, you are already giving so much to your child by exposing them to all of these sounds, to all of these languages, that try to make a concerted effort that you are, when you're home alone, or maybe if you have an activity that you like to do with them of maybe it's cooking or going on a walk and everything, try to remember that during those moments, you are only going to speak one language. and try as much as possible that that be the language that you feel the most comfortable in, that it is your native tongue.
And one thing I'd love to add is
Yes.
actually, what are your goals for all these languages?
Exactly.
Because are you really expecting them to be fluent in all 4 languages? It does really cap off you have 3 strong literacy languages that you're going to study in and write in and maybe go to university in. And that 4th language is more like when you go and visit family in Japan, you'll be able to be conversational. So just keep that in mind as well as you're choosing which. Basically try and spend 30% of your week in the languages that you're trying to get to literacy level. And the other ones, children will get a more, sorry, I'm not being very articulate after a long day at the conference, a receptive understanding of the language. Thank you for being with me.
Right. And
Cool.
it's true, it's true that it's a very good point, Simone, because there's the oral language, and then there's the written language, and there's the reading language. And I know for me, being in a bilingual household or having raised my children bilingual, I've only raised them to be able to be bilingual orally. I did not make the efforts that they would write in the other language. They read it, they understand it, we read together, but writing, writing in English and writing in French is two very different worlds, and I did not pursue that, probably because I don't feel myself very comfortable in the grammar and all of this of French. My husband could have done it, but we chose to immerse our children completely in the English and go to public schools here and give them the gift of speaking a language at home, traveling back to France every year. As young, we would actually send them off on their own to, spend the summer with their cousins, and their grandparents were there. They didn't speak a word of English, so they were completely immersed in French. So we gave them the language, but our goal wasn't that they would be fluent in writing both. So, very good point about knowing what your ultimate goal is. You're muted, Simone.
Okay, sorry about that. Another question from a different Katerina. She's a native of Poland, and we have not had our child grow up bilingually since birth. How can I start speaking a second language with our child who's 3 without confusing them? Is there a way, or is this possible? And by the way, there are lots of questions on bilingualism, mostly, but if you do have questions on language, feel free to pop them in the chat room. It just seems to be very interesting because we haven't talked about bilingualism on the show very much. Okay.
Yes. I would say it's never too late. I mean, 3 is still, very much in the absorbent mind. I learned that really to learn a foreign language as a native speaker, it's really those first 12 years is really the best time. You can always learn a foreign language. You might have an accent. You might, my husband, who is French, learned English when we came here 20 years ago, and he still has quite a thick French accent, and he will never get rid of it, which is very charming for some people. But for me, for example, having grown up with both languages from the beginning, I can go back and forth easily. So 3 years old is not too late. It's not confusing. I think it's just telling them the story as to why you want to show them a different language. I would definitely hope that language is your native tongue again, just because we're able to really give the pureness of that language, and start reading books, start listening to music from that country, and so on and so forth. And if you can travel, even better.
Great. Now a good one from Alexandra. So as you know, our son Philip is 3 years old. I actually know this family. They're from our classes. We live in the Netherlands. The mother's Russian, the father's Romanian. Mother and father speak to each other in English since they don't know each other's languages, and Dutch is at a very basic level. Philip goes to Dutch kindergarten and speaks Dutch. At this point, he speaks Romanian with his father, Russian with his mother, and Dutch with everyone else. He doesn't speak or understand English. We reach a point when we need a common family language so we can communicate with all of us using the same language that everyone understands. What language should we use as a family language? What would you suggest? It is really complicated when you're trying to have a family conversation and you've got 3 languages at the table.
I think that would be, you know, kind of part of a family meeting, a family decision of let's pick one and stick to it. So to me, again, it's going to be the language that you and your partner are the most comfortable with, and try as much as possible to stick to it. But, you know, like I said earlier, we all have our different family languages, I think, you know, especially with all these families that are here today that speak these, you know, multiple languages. That ends up being the child's language, is to be able to intertwine everything. You know, when I speak, for example, with my sister, who were both bilingual, we're going to intertwine words because there's a word in French that is going to explain what the emotion of what I'm trying to say much, much better than the word, you know, that's coming up for me in English. So being okay with the fact that they are going to intertwine, and that is the beauty of your family, is that you have these multiple languages. But if you want to pick one, you know, I think it's you and your partner kind of need to decide which one that is and stick to it. And that sometimes is the hard
really
part, is sticking to it.
Looking
Right.
at it, if the mother doesn't speak Romanian and the father doesn't speak Russian, then it has to be between English and Dutch. And Dutch is very basic. So actually they both know English really well, and they just have to wait for Philip to catch on that that's the family language. While he's not speaking in that language, he will gradually increase his understanding in that language when it's consistent. And you can always translate, oh, you didn't understand what we said? And then explain it in the Romanian from the father or the Russian.
Right.
That's my kind of very practical trying to look at it. But again, yeah, I like what Jean-Marie says, is it's a family decision. One, maybe you can even ask Philip, like, would you like us to speak really bad Dutch? Because you speak Dutch really well. You could teach us. You know, I don't know how it will work, but I know that when my Dutch wasn't as good as my children, it was very hard to just have a conversation. It became about language and correcting. And actually I just went, no, we're going back to English, because speaking Dutch at home, like we were doing Dutch out of the house to see if the domains of use would work for us, but it was too far after we'd moved for that to be a possibility.
Yeah.
Right.
And I would really, I would recommend that you speak the language that you're the most comfortable with, that you're able to give the best of the language. So if, you know, Dutch, you're learning it, I would just be the common language, be English at home, and you know, Dutch, he's getting it out and about, and you'll catch up and so forth. So yeah. There is one question that came in that we have not covered that I wouldn't mind covering. Yeah. And this is from Caroline, who is asking about our opinion about sign language for babies. Mm-hmm. And so I know I think we talked about this on another show a while back, but I highly recommend sign language. You can start very early on for basic signs so that your child can learn to really communicate what their needs are. Extremely helpful, especially when they go through the kind of that pre-verbal time in their life when they know what they want. They you know, but they're so frustrated because they can't express it. And sign really helps there, because, you know, they can get their needs met. So I definitely encourage it for sure. What about you, Simone?
Yes, I was in the chat, but I agree with the sign language. Definitely. There's nothing to add to that one. Yeah. I actually just want to note that I'm going to close the questions in the chat, because we've got still quite a few questions that have come in. And okay. So I've closed now the questions in the chat, and we'll keep going. Did you want to answer the one from Caroline that's just come in the chat as well? Can you read that one?
What if both parents and the society speaks the same language, but we'd always dreamed of our children being bilingual and getting all of the benefits of that? How do you do that if everyone in the family is monolingual and living in the same monolingual culture? You can, great question, Caroline. You can, look as if there's bilingual immersion schools, for one, for your child. You start listening to language tapes and you start learning a language together with your partner and kind of making it a family activity. You travel if you can. And one way that I was introduced to language, or at least that my mother kept up our English when we were living abroad, was to have au pairs that spoke that language, which is very useful as well. Maybe a little bit, when they're older, but having whoever, if you do have another caregiver, maybe that they have a native tongue that they can speak to your child. So, if there's, depending on what language you would like to learn and you would like to introduce to your child, try to find activities where there are native speakers or have a native speaker interact with your child on a regular basis.
Great. There's a very long question from Asnat, which I won't read out all of it, but she's basically wondering how to introduce writing and reading in both languages. So, for example, she has the sandpaper letters in one language, and she's thinking of because the Latvian letters are kind of different to the Estonian, and how she will do these. Yeah, I basically would have to replace and remove a few letters, but so far I think it wouldn't be overly confusing, things like this.
So for me, again, it's going to be to really focus on the acquisition of one language at first in like I said earlier, in the sounds and everything. And when you feel that they're comfortable in understanding kind of the concept of the symbols representing sounds and being able to put the sounds together to read and such, then you can start introducing another one. And this is just from the experience that I had in the bilingual classroom that I worked in, is we always focused on first the English, which was what I taught, and then my co-teacher was Spanish speaking. And we always did the English first, which was the language of the culture. And once there was a real understanding of how we put sounds together, how we read, how we write, then we would introduce that second language. And I know the Russian family that I mentioned earlier, she's Montessori trained and has sandpaper letters at home in Russian. So she's waited until he's, acquired the English or the Spanish, maybe, I'm not sure, and is doing it at home to kind of, show him what the other language is. But he's 5.5. So there's been a real foundation set beforehand. So I will really focus on one first and then add on the other ones.
Great. Anna says, I am a mother of two girls, one of 2 years and 11 months and another of 5 months. We're a bilingual family, Romanian myself and Italian my husband, and live in Switzerland, where girls are exposed to French. I speak in Romanian to them. My eldest is slowly starting to say Romanian words. There's a fly, hello. I am not at all worried. She speaks a lot in French for her age, and she speaks also in Italian a little. I heard people saying that one can tell that we do not understand them when they speak in the second language and not the language we address them into. In this way, the child has to speak our language. Is this a good idea? Okay, so she's saying that people pretend not to understand what their child's saying so that they're kind of forcing them to speak their language. So far, what I did was simply to speak, sing, and read her books in Romanian.
So this to me is going to be what feels good, right to you. I mean, I'm really, I know families who have done that where, they want the child to respond in their language and they just go, I don't understand. Personally, I didn't do that. They would answer back in whatever language they want. And I just kept on speaking whatever language I wanted to, make sure. And to me, if they're responding correctly in whatever language they want, that means that they understand, right? Because they're giving me feedback that they understood the question, or they understood the command, or whatever. So I don't know. To me, it's and
I
kind of,
agree, Jean-Marie.
yeah.
I totally agree, because I feel like it's almost a lie to say, I don't understand you. It's like, and then you turn around and you answer someone's question in Dutch or something. I kind of don't feel like it's fair and honest.
Yeah.
And that we just also trust that the child's absorbing it. And when they go on their holiday to Japan and they realize there's usefulness to the other language, now I can play with the Japanese kids, then, it comes out. So
Yeah.
I think,
yeah. And to me, it's a little bit humiliating. I mean, there was a comment you had earlier about a father being traumatized about learning a foreign language. And I came to this country when I was 11, and I didn't understand all of it. And it was pretty, kind of hard being told, like, I don't understand you. But there, they really didn't understand me. So as a parent, if you understand them, you can help them. You can ask them, like, oh, do you know how to say that in Romanian, in French, or whatever? But to say, I don't understand you, like Simone says, it's kind of a lie. And personally, I find it a little humiliating.
And if you force a language, it's going to be more resistant, I think. So I just think you have to just trust and trust and trust. And like when a child speaks to me in Dutch, I understand Dutch, but I answer back in English. So yeah, that's our suggestion. And like you say, it's a very personal choice and what you feel comfortable with.
Very personal. Yes.
Okay, Ludmila, it's inevitable. Kids often hear offensive and rude words from their peers in the kindergarten or from movies and start using them, sometimes even without knowing their meaning. It doesn't actually have a question related to that, but I think it's worth talking on it. What do we think about children picking up language from other people that we don't want them to use? Do you have any thoughts on it, Jean-Marie?
I try not to make too big of a deal out of it, because just like you say, they don't really know the meaning. So you can just kind of, let it be. Like, I think if we go, oh no, you cannot say that, then that's going to be very intriguing, and they're going to repeat it, because we know that children want to push our boundaries, and if we tell them not to, they're going to want to do it. So at least when they're young and they don't quite understand the meaning, I would just brush it off as, again, the absorbent mind that is absorbing the good and the bad. So, but later on, when they know that it is offensive, then that is really something, important to set your boundaries as, this is not language that we speak in our home. The understanding that some language can be hurtful to people, that and such. And that, to me, is just part of our education, part of our modeling, being very careful not to model ourselves, rude language and such. And sometimes, we might catch ourselves if we're upset and say something, and we can say, oh my gosh, that was inappropriate. I shouldn't say that at home, or whatever. But, at first, like you say, they're going to pick things up out on the playground from their friends, from older siblings of their friends and things like that. If they're in a reasoning mind age where you can talk about it, I would definitely, have the conversation of, there's some language that can be very offensive, and there's things that we need to be careful never to say in certain circumstances and all this. There's other families that, let them kind of express it, just kind of like, when we say, get your wiggles out, and they can just go, whatever, beep, 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 and just have fun with it and giggle about it and all that, to get it out of your system, because it is in the comfort of your home, and it's okay. And know that we're not going to go say that, at the grocery store or at church or whatever. So different ways of aborting the situation. What about you, Simone?
Yeah, so I had to have the conversation with my children when we moved to Holland because some of the swear words we use are like adjectives to Dutch people. So it's very much a young child might say, I don't know if there's any children on the call, so I won't mention any. But so I had to explain those words aren't appropriate to use in our house because when our family come to visit, we just don't want that to be part of our family language. And we hope that you don't even use them at school because it can be considered unkind. Same as, some people use God's name to swear. And I also found that some people, it's important to them. And I wouldn't find, like, to us, it's important to respect other people's feelings about it. So we're not going to use that as a word for swearing. And we'll think of some other fun words that we can use when we drop something on our toe and these kind of things.
Right.
So it was a conversation. It actually went pretty well. They understood it. And actually, it's not something that I would pull up in that moment because these children are generally a bit older, like 4, 5, 6. And you can say, oh, when you said that word earlier when your friends are around and you thought it was really funny. I'm just telling you that. And then you can talk about it at a neutral moment rather than jumping in and correcting them in front of their friends and that kind of thing.
Yes, very good point. Yeah.
Millie, there's still quite a few questions. Have you got maybe 10 minutes, Jean-Marie, and we just run over a little bit? Or
sure, just a little bit, yes.
Okay, so Millie's other question is about bilingualism. The dad's Belarusian, the mum's Bulgarian. When preparing sessions for expanding the vocabulary with cards and objects, should we allocate time and prepare cards for each language? So it should be at the same time each day, or what do you recommend with one parent speaking in each language, and that kind of thing? For me, I don't think I would get so complicated because you could just use one person, one language, and you can just, if the dad's playing with the child, he does them just as I do in my play group. So the parents of different language than I do. When I'm working with the child, I use English and they use Dutch or every other language. Yeah, no,
and I would agree with you. There is, again, follow the child. Like, don't regiment yourself as to, between 11 and 12, I'm only going to speak this language, and between 12 and 1, this language. It's more about the human interaction, and the same language material can be used in the different languages. I mean, the only time when we need to really create different, cards and things is really when we start reading. When it's still oral language, objects and cards and everything don't need to be labeled. And so it's really when we start reading that we're going to need to maybe create different material.
And that's if you're homeschooling, because otherwise you probably don't need reading materials in the house. Then you just have books in Belarus and books in Bulgarian and that kind of thing. And lastly, do we have any specific quotes by Maria Montessori on developing language skills and more particularly bilingualism?
So I did not find any on specifically bilingualism. I did read one at the beginning about just the amazing, the brain of how all of this language is happening in secrecy. And in the absorbent mind, there is a whole chapter on language acquisition. And we will also be sharing the chart that I showed earlier about language acquisition and kind of the different stages that the child goes through. But I have yet to find specifically bilingualism.
Great. B asks, I'm trilingual and would like to include the second language German into my Montessori classroom with my English speaking students. I've tried with songs and games with words, and many times I use German for very simple directions, but I found out that this is not enough and I'd like to do more, and maybe even to include a German area or corner in our classroom. My question is, do you have some ideas or tips for me how to include the second language into my classroom in order to be more successful? Maybe there's good literature to purchase or any other help. There's definitely a book I can recommend by Colin Baker that's called A Parent's and Teacher's Guide to Bilingualism. So that would be quite interesting. But if she's the only teacher in the environment, this is a really interesting question, huh?
Yeah, I would try to be, if you, I mean, the best is really immersion. It's like I was sharing earlier, I co-taught and I had a native Spanish speaker and I'm a native English speaker, and we both taught, simultaneously. I was the lead teacher, so it was the main language was English. But so if if you have somebody else that you could have in that spoke only German, for example, that could kind of help you give more of that. Otherwise, I would maybe do part of the day, or maybe if you have a communal, lunch or something that is just that specific part of the day is when you get to really introduce them to your language and speak to them as much as possible. I would also, maybe talk to the parents, see how open they are to that and how they could help you, and if it would be okay that you speak only German for certain mornings or things like that. The best is this consistency. So the best is that you're able to give it to them every single day for sure, so that there's an immersion. So it kind of depends on your situation and the support that you have also from the families that you work with.
Okay, for the last 3 ones that have come in, we'll keep them really short just to speed them along. Barbara had one question that's really been covered about how she should introduce some languages, but there's Hungarian, English, and starting to speak Portuguese because they've moved to Portugal. She sees that her daughter, who's already starting to read some 7 to 8 letter words in Hungarian, is trying to read random words from books aloud for herself. And she's got books in all the 3 languages, and she's noticed that when she tries to read in Portuguese, she's been using mainly English sounds, and it's all happening suddenly. She's not really sure if she should be using Portuguese sounds and these kind of things. So
So again, there I would focus on what is the first main language that you want her to read well, and really try, as much as possible to focus on that. And once that's established, then you start introducing another language to start reading.
And the other thing we always say is teach by teaching, not by correcting. So note that she's reading those words, but then say, oh, are you having any trouble with that? Would you like an English book, to try your English sounds?
Exactly.
But you don't have to actually step in, correct her and say, oh, this is a Portuguese book. It has to sound like a different thing. So you can just make a mental note, particularly if you can't correct her because you don't know the Portuguese sounds yourself.
Yeah,
okay. And for Lavinia, thank you very much for this important, she was really interested in language development. I need to help improve her children's speech. It's not easy to always to improve. She wants practical advice about asking open questions, and also something like, how you play I Spy, like learning sounds. Would you like to explain how to have conversation? I can talk to the asking questions, and then maybe you can explain the sound game like an I Spy.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one thing that we do, one of our lessons that we give is actually conversation. It's asking a child a question, and so it's just getting out of the habit of always giving information. But if the child says, "Oh, I went to the zoo," instead of saying, "Oh, that's nice," you can think, "Oh, what's the next question I'm going to ask?" And what's the next question I'm going to ask? And it's called the questioning exercise in my album, and it's very logical. But because we're not always in that frame of mind to listen and to draw out some information, it's just a way of encouraging. If they're not interested, they'll change topic, won't stop talking. But while you've got them engaged, just keep asking, or go and see if anything else comes. So that's something that I would say for the open asking. And Jean-Marie, if you want to explain some I Spy, how you want to do
the I Spy, and I'll share with you a link of a video that I have on that as well. I Spy is really when you have introduce the sounds. So remember that the symbols of the written language, when we are sharing them with the child, we really want to give it the sound. So, a C, for example, to write cat, we're going to look at it and we're going to go k, k, k. So it's really the sound. And so they'll be able to put them together later on for reading. So the I Spy game, basically, all it is I spy with my little eyes something that starts with a k, k. Do you see something that starts with a k? Oh, yes, there's a cat there. K, cat. And so on. So it's really about saying just the beginning sound of a word and just asking the child what they see around their home or outside, wherever you are. What do I see? Do you see the same thing that I see that starts with a B, with a T, with, whatever? And so that's the I Spy game. And you can do it with the beginning sound. You can do it with the end sound. You can do it with the middle sound. And it's just, again, this awareness and the development of their auditory sense to really detect the subtleness of all the sounds that our written language has.
And once they're starting to understand which the K is the beginning for cat, then they might even start to go, oh, what does this look like? And we can get the sandpaper letters, and you can start to feel what a K looks like. And then you'll get to the movable alphabet, which will be taking a K and putting that there, and A, and finding an A and putting that there. And that's how they first start writing without being able to physically write or to be read, because they're just sounding out the sounds that they've been playing with I Spy. So that's how it then builds into the language material and reading and writing.
And when you're at home and you don't have all of the materials that Simone mentioned of, sandpaper letters and movable alphabets, which is what we have in the classroom, it's just about giving them really the sound. Like they're going to, once they start being aware that the symbols of our written language have meaning and have sounds, they're going to want to know what everything is. So just if you can remember to give them the sounds as much as possible, that's the best thing that you can do for them. For then they're going to be able to start putting the sounds of the symbols together, and that's how reading really happens.
Okay, before I read the last question, just to say that the sandpaper letters and things would only be if you were homeschooling, because we don't like to duplicate the material and have that at home. It's really best left for the teacher, because you don't want to teach them the wrong way or anything like that. Okay. And Maria, lucky last question. This has been super interesting. So many different combinations. I hope you found it helpful. My daughter just turned 2. She's exposed to 3 languages, 2 at home, 1 community language. She understands a lot, but she only says probably 20 words in total with some signs. She's not worried about that because she understands the language explosion is coming. But the problem is that at the playground, for example, she's having trouble communicating. So how can you help her in the playground communicate without having the words?
So that would be, if you're not right there next to her, I think children find ways of communicating.
She's being a bit aggressive though, so she's pushing other kids. Sorry, I was simplifying the question.
Okay. So so maybe giving her some nonverbal signals that she can say, like if she's getting frustrated or she wants somebody to stop, to just say, put your hand up and say stop, or being observant maybe as to what are the words that she might be needing more, and maybe trying to give her those, when you're gone, like saying again, I noticed at the playground, you were having a hard time letting somebody know you didn't want to share your truck or whatever. And this is what you can say. And kind of role playing there would be the one, because here, to me, what's important here is that you need to be your child's translator in a way of really helping them be able to communicate. But I'm just thinking of myself. I just came back from a trip to Moscow. I did not understand a thing, but and it is frustrating, but I was able to figure ways of communicating, or figure ways to ask the questions, whether it's, by weird hand gestures or showing something or something. So I think, children are way more capable than we give them credit for. So, I think she will figure it out. But definitely, if you see that she's being aggressive or, getting really frustrated, is really taking some special time to give her more tools so that she can communicate her needs at the playground, for sure.
Yeah, we often teach them to put their hands on their hips and say, "Ik vind dat niet leuk." And I just say that, even though I'm saying, you can tell them, "Ik vind dat niet leuk." And so that means I don't like that, basically, in Dutch, if the other children. So you can apologize and you can help and model in the meantime. So thank you, everyone. That was a bumper. That was huge.
That was huge, yes.
I hope you're going to sleep well tonight, Jean-Marie, after answering all of those. I had to be a little bit quieter because we had a lot of background noise here in the conference, but I'm super glad that I could make it. And did you want to add anything that you've been working on lately?
No, not really. I've just been actually working on this book that I mentioned earlier, and I turned in the manuscript yesterday. So now I'm just waiting for the edited version. But this is a perfect example of bilingualism, because here I am in the US, and this is a French editing house that asked for a book on the Montessori method. So I had to write it in French, and that was very difficult. So luckily my husband helped me quite a bit on, getting the right meaning of everything that I wanted to say. But that's really it. I'm going to be, if some of you have watched the Be the Best Parent You Can Be interview summits, I'm starting to think about the next one. So that's kind of my next big project, and that won't be till October, but I'm definitely starting to think about that.
Well, that's great. And here I'm going to enjoy the rest of my weekend at the Montessori retreat in just out of Zurich in the Swiss Alps. And then we'll be having a bilingualism workshop, funnily enough, at the end of May in my space. So lots of these questions will get answered. We get an expert to come in, and she's great. Eowyn. So if anyone's based in Amsterdam, you're probably on the newsletter list, and you'll get an invitation for that.
Oh, so, and if you could do a Facebook Live or something during that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I've spoken to her about a recording live, and she's not a big fan of live. So we're going to look at sometime recording it to put it online, because it's a fondly requested workshop, and she does travel a lot, and she'd reach a lot of people.
Wonderful.
She says, thank you so much. So many great ideas and good points of view at True Treasury. You are most welcome. Thank you for being here and for answering your questions as well. Jean-Marie, lovely to connect as always. And we'll see you all. Did Zoom work for you all? Did you like that? Give us a thumbs up in the in your pictures or in the chat if you like this format. It seems to work. More stable than Google Hangouts, I think. So
yes,
we'll probably stick with this for now.
And I will post the recording on our YouTube channel later today, and I'll let you know when that's up.
Oh, cool. We're getting from everyone. Thanks from Kim. Appreciate your time, and it's moving and sharing of knowledge and experience. And I love Sonia's. It says, merci beaucoup, Jean-Marie.
Yeah.
Lots of thumbs up. So they also like Zoom. Great. Thank you. Great. All right, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.